So my name is Nikki Ahrenstorff, and I went to Monterey High School. I graduated high school in 2007. I then went to Cal State University, Monterey Bay, where I graduated in 2012. I completed my master's at the University of Southern California in 2014. I nominated Gary Childs, my high school English teacher, for the 2016 Carlston Family Foundation Award for Outstanding Teacher. I nominated Gary for a lot of reasons. I nominated him because when you're in Gary's classroom, there's a certain feeling that you get. I think that the first day I went into his classroom, I could feel it. I think that he understands his students on another level. He encourages his students, and he definitely inspires his students. He allows you to have a voice, and he values every single thing that you say. So Gary Child stands out for many reasons. He stands out, one, because he cares. And it's interesting. I think you assume that all of your teachers care, but I think we all have varied educational experiences, and we've all been in situations where it's been clear that you've sort of been just passed along because it was easier to pass you along than care about you. Gary cared about every single thing that we ever did. Every piece of writing I ever wrote, he would review with me personally. He was there at lunch if you ever needed to talk. He allowed the content to be your content. I felt before Gary that wasn't for me, that school wasn't for me, that books, while I could read them, they were for somebody else, for this higher group of people that I wasn't a part of. But Gary opened the door and he said, come through, this is your story, this is your book, and they're writing for you. And I never was told that before. I didn't know that I was able to feel that and to think that and to write about that, and that's what Gary Childs does every single day. So I became a high school English teacher for many reasons. I thought about what would I want to say at the end of my career, or at the end of my life. What could I have done that would be worthwhile? And there was no experience greater in my life than being in his classroom. And I thought, if I could have that every single day, I think I would have an amazing life. So I chose teaching. I chose teaching because of my experiences in Gary's class. I was in his 9th grade class and his 12th grade class. And if I could open the door for other students to let them know it is for you, like Gary opened it for me and said, you can do this too, then I think that I would be happy. I think that my life would have meaning beyond perhaps a cubicle or a typical other 9 to 5. And so far, these past 2 years, it's proven to be true. I mean, I think I have the greatest job in the entire world, and my neighbor is Gary, so our classrooms are right next to each other. And so, I mean, every day I get to be with the person who inspired me. So that's pretty incredible. So this is a really fantastic question. So Gary and I talk about this all the time. In fact, we co-teach a class this year. So there's a lot of dialogue around curriculum. And since I student taught with him, we had to have dialogue around pedagogy and routines and styles. And I think if you asked me what Gary's teaching philosophy is, it's incredibly difficult to state. I mean, I think some things are innate within people, and I think Gary Childs was born to be a teacher. There's no prescribed learning theory or philosophy or style of pedagogy that he prescribes to. It is, at the end of the day, in his heart. I think that there's definitely, when you take your preparation courses, you have the theories classes, you have the curriculum design classes, and all of that is important, and it's something you think about daily. But there's this human aspect that I don't know that you can teach in a textbook. So that's what Gary possesses, and I think it comes down to a lot more than just what did he teach you that you learned in your textbook to become a better teacher. It's more like, what did you experience? And I think when somebody cares at the end of the day, it's greater than anything you could ever read about. And I think that's what I learned most from Gary, is to care about the kids that show up in your room. The teaching profession is crazy, and I think sometimes teachers are stressed and they have a lot, and a lot is forced on them outside of things they can't control. And Gary has always said, you teach who shows up in your classroom. It doesn't matter where they come from, who they are, what issues they have. If they're in your room, it doesn't matter how prepared they are either. You teach who shows up. And I think that has stuck with me the absolute most through my teaching career. Right, and so we've had this conversation, right? I thought every teacher got into teaching because they cared about their students, and I think sometimes they do, or they do part-time, but it's heavy to care about 200 contacts plus. It's a lot, and I think it's easier to block out all the pain that your kids might really be going through. But Gary doesn't allow that. Gary asks you, hey, why were you absent? He will have a conversation with you. I really like what you wrote. Can you stay after so that we can talk about it? He'll make comments to you in regards to not just how you did on a test or an essay, but about your life. He wants to know more of who you are as a human, not a number. So you might have been his 189th student that walked through the door that day, but he still has something to say. He still wants to know something about you. I think at the end of the day, you can tell that Gary cared more about you than the curriculum. That might be a crazy thing to say, but you as a human being was his first priority before anything else. And in my educational experience prior to his classroom, I don't know that that ever was the case with any other teacher. So prior to walking into Gary's classroom, I felt behind. I felt like school was reserved for a certain group of students or people, and I wasn't part of that group. I wasn't from a privileged background. I had an incredibly difficult background. I learned to read really late, third grade, and I felt like all of that also was me trying to learn on my own by watching other students read and listening and trying to find the stops and the pauses when they would stop and try to follow along. And the fact that my teacher never noticed that, and I still went on. The fact that nobody asked me anything like, do you really understand what's going on, or why aren't you turning in your homework? Never ever happened. It never happened. It didn't matter. Well, at least it felt like it didn't matter. So I was passed along. I think that process made me confused. I think it made me angry. It made me question a lot of just adults in general. It didn't feel like adults were there to look out for me or take care of me or teach me, in any facet of my life. So I felt very much alone. And walking into Gary's class, all of a sudden it mattered. Why was I absent? Why did I write this way? Could you change it this way? Could you alter it this way? And what would it do to your writing? He would give us poets, and before that, I didn't care about poetry, right? There wasn't things that, none of this mattered to me because it wasn't for me. That's just how it was. That was my label. It wasn't for me. So when you walk into his classroom, and all of a sudden he says, no, it is for you, it makes you step back a little bit, and it makes you think, why does somebody care? And it turns out that they care because you matter, and I just never felt like I mattered before I walked into his room. Yeah, so when I got to college, it was different because you see your professor for a semester, not a year. You see him twice a week, maybe 3 times a week for less than an hour. So coming from I had Gary 9th grade, and then I had him 12th grade. So I walked in and I thought I was like, this is going to be like high school, and then it wasn't. But I felt like I had a voice. I could write something and I could say something, and it mattered. And it was a learning curve in terms of just the pace. It moved faster. It was different, but I never felt discouraged, not once, because Gary told me, it's possible, you can do it, and you have opinions that matter. So I went into my English class. I fell in love. I chose English as my major, but I loved every subject too. It was difficult, but I felt extremely prepared. I felt confident in terms of no matter what was proposed, I could formulate something, I could come up with something, and that it would be right, that I could do it. And I think his ability to sort of assess you in a way where it taps you creatively and analytically, not just memorize a bunch of terms, that ability to know that I had already been thinking that way in high school, it translated to college because I was able to sort of take those risks already and feel like it was okay to take the risk. Which, before, if I didn't have Gary in high school, I think I would have been shut down. I don't think a risk was something I ever would have taken. I think I would have played it safe and maybe not even have gone to college. I might have just worked because that was comfortable and something I know I could do. So I decided to major in English because of the voice I think that Gary gave me.